Okay, we're up to Pei Hey Amid Al, Pei Vav. Today's daf is Pei Vav. We're on the bottom line on Pei Hey Amid Base. So we said discussing where you could bring uh, wheat from, oil from, and we said you shouldn't bring it from a field that was fertilized. It's not good for the crop. And we said that you should not bring on piktonin. And we'll see what that is. But it says if you do bring from Zaysim apiktonin, it would be kosher. Fred Gemara Vatanya, Emevin apiktonin vim heavy puzzle, Amid Aleph. You see, it's puzzle. That's a steer to a Mishnah to the Brisa. The Mishnah says it's kosher b'di'eved. The Brisa says I feel b'di'eved. It's puzzle, right? Why mifneshu sraf? Because apiktonin is sraf. It's not considered shemen. It's considered mohel. Mohel means it's the sweat. It's like the sweat that comes out of it. It's not the actual olive. Rabbi Yosef like kasha, Harab Chia, Harab Shimon bar Rebbe. It's a it's machlokes whether the moil of piktonin is considered shemen or not. The Reb Chia Zarek lay, Reb Chia threw it away, so obviously he felt it was not shemen. For Reb Shimon bar Rebbe, matval bey, he would be toivel in it. And Reb Shimon bar Rebbe was wealthy. V'simonecha ashirim mikamsim. Those people who are wealthy, they're cheap. In other words, it's funny. The last few days we had insights, right? Into you have people who look poor, and you never know what they have, and then you have people who are wealthy. You think they're wealthy, and then you have people who are wealthy who do poor-like things, like they're mekamsin. They're cheap. They don't throw out the apiktonen. They don't throw out that mile. Shisha chadashim b'shemen hamor. By Esther, it says she was 6 months before they came to Achashverosh. They would go ahead and have them use for 6 months shemen hamor. My shemen hamor. Rav Huna Rav Chia Amar sitachta. It's called sitachta. Rashi brings over here. It's balsam oil. Rav Yirmiyah Rav Rabba shemen zayish lehevi shlis. It's shemen zayis that did not get to a third of its growth. That's shemen hamor. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer an piktonoin shemen zayish lehevi shlish. What's an piktonoin? That's what shemen zayis didn't grow a third of its growth. And lama, what do you need it for? You go use this as a depilatory. You would remove the hair, and it would go ahead and make the skin luminous. You know, it had that capacity. The Mishnah says you should not bring from Menachos from the oil olives that were that were soaked in water. Tanurabanan shemen zayis kavush. Shemen zayis that is pickled, shalak cooked, shari. It was soaked in water. Ushal shmarim. It came from leads. Ushal reach ra. The kind of shmak shmek. Lo yavi. You shouldn't bring it. Vim hevi. If you do bring it, puzzle. It's puzzle. Boy, Rabba, for the umpteenth time, hekdishu nausha yilka alav. If you magdish it, would you get malchus mishum balmum? Keeping the puzzle kibal mum dami, since it's puzzles like a mamum, and balmum we said yesterday you get 5 malchus. So dilma ain't balmum ela behema. That's a din only in the behema and nothing that's grown from the ground. And as we said yesterday twice, the third time we say teku. Okay, we've been discussing again where you bring the wheat from, where you bring the shemen from, and now we're going to describe the process of shemen. The process of shemen and exactly which was used for the menorah, which was used for Menachos. Now the menorah, guys, was shemen zayich zach kosis. It's like the alpha aleph. It's the best of the best. And the Gemara is going to go through. We're going to see there 3 times a year they picked. Olives did not ripen all simultaneously, so there were 3 pickings a year. Within each picking, there was 3 processes. Okay, within each picking, there was 3 processes where you can go ahead and extract the oil. Right. So the first picking and the first process of the first picking is the best of the best. Right. The first picking and the first process of the first picking is the best of the best. So let's go through it. So be Geshmak and Mishnah. Shloisha zaysim hein. There were 3 times a year they would pick the olives. They would harvest the olives. Shloisha shmanim. Right? And they would go ahead and each time they would process it 3 different ways. So 3 times a year, and each time there was 3 processes. Hazayas Harishoin, where they get the first picking from, Megagaro Berosh Hazayas. Now the Zayas tree, guys, is very, very short. It's a short tree, right? It's a short tree. At the top of the tree the olives that are exposed to the sun will ripen first. So it says over here, the first pickings of the olive tree, which is done 3 times a year, the first picking is from the top of the tree because that's going to go ahead and ripen first because of its exposure to the sun. The kaitesh, after you would pick it, you would go ahead and put it in a mortar. And then you would go ahead and put it into a basket. And that basket, it would drain. And that basket was like a strainer. It would drain into a basin below. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, sevivos hasal. You didn't put it in the sal itself. You put it in the sides of the sal. And therefore, you'd have a double filter. You'd have the filter of the sides. Then it would go into the bottom. Then it would go into the kli that's underneath it. Again, according to the Tanakama, you only have one filter, the bottom, and then going down. According to this, Rabbi Yehuda, it's going through the sides, to the bottom, to down, so you have a double filter process. Right? Hasal ze, hasal, ze rishon. That's the first thing they would do to the grape. So they would take a mortar, they would pound them, and put them in a sal. Chazav v'toyim b'koira. The next process would be they would be towing, they would place upon it a beam, and the heaviness of the beam would fetch ois the oil. It would fetch the oil out. Rabbi Yehuda says you wouldn't use a beam because since it's so heavy, it would cause cloudy olives. So they would use a stone which is not as heavy as a beam. Zesheni, that's the second one. So again, the first process is a mortar into a sal. Rabbi Yehuda says the sides of the sal. Second process, a beam. Rabbi Yehuda says an avanim. Chazav v'tachan. They would then grind it. V'tayin, and then they would put it on it a second time, a beam. Zeh shlishi. This is what? This is shlishi. So 3 processes, right? 3 times a year they picked it. The first picking is from the top of the tree. 3 processes. The first one's kodesh b'sal, machloikas the sides of the sal. Second one, they would go ahead and use a beam, machloikas avanim. The third one, they would go ahead and put it in a grinder and then a beam. Harishain, the oil that came out first from the first process, lemenaira. V'hashar, and all the rest would be lemenachos. The second and the third would be lemenachos. Good. Hasheni migag. Okay, you guys, you good? Fellas, is everyone okay? Now, Sheni over here means the second harvest. Sheni over here means, you have to keep counting with the numbers over here. Sheni over here means the second harvest. The first harvest was on the top of the tree. Hasheni is migagaru b'roish hagag. So it's right. Rosh hagag means, guys, look at Rashi. Look at Rashi, about 10 lines off from the bottom. Make it 9. Migagaru b'roish hagag. Melakidis hagagarim. They would gather the olives, hasmuchim legag, that was next to their roof. There's a seyem hoya etzel gago sehem, because they would plant their olive trees next to their roofs. And those would go ahead and ripen secondly. So it seems they would, again, they used the roofs of the house. We saw in Masechta Eruvin, they would use the roofs of the house, and the tree was next to the house, and that was level. That level of olive would ripen in secondary, and that's where your second harvest came from. So that's what it means over here. Hasheni migagara b'reish hagag. The koitish, they would use a mortar, squeeze it out. From nice like a sal. Again, the same achloikis, the same process. Zer rishain, tayin b'koira, Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'avanim. Zer sheni, same thing. Chazav v'tayin, chazav v'tachan, they grinded it up. V'tayin, they put a beam on it again. Zer shlishi, again, same process. The only difference was this was the secondary picking, not the first picking. Right? This is the secondary picking and not the first picking. Harishon limenaira. The rishon would be used for the menaira. This is the rishon is before you put in the this is after you use the mortar, before you put it in the beam. The hashal menachos shlishi, the third groups of olives being picked. Oitnoi bebeis habad, whatever was left over on the tree, they would harvest and put in the beis habad, put it into the press, actually lock it till it got soft, till it got fashimelt. But Nassim would tell you, it got fashimelt, it got spoiled. It got spoiled. because it was soft. Umaleu, they would then take it up, take it out of the Beis Habad, uminagvoi, and they would go ahead what? And they would dry them off. They would dry them off two reasons. One, to get rid of the bad smell, and also to get rid of the moil. Since it was soft, they had the oozing juice out, which is not shemen. Right? Kaitish, they then did the same process they did in the first two. They ground it with a mortar. Toyin b'koyer Rabbi Yehuda b'avanim zesheni chazav v'tochen v'toyin zeshlishi harish l'menay v'shalom menachos. Okay, so we had the three processes repeated themselves, right? And the nafkaminas were what? Where you got it from. The first one came from the top of the tree. The second one came parallel to your gag. The third one was the rest on the tree. That was on the rest of the tree. You'd put it in a maton. You put it in a big vat. You let it get spoiled a little bit, bring it up to the roof. You would go ahead, dry it off, and then you go through the process of first the mortar, then the beam, then the avanim, according to Rabbi Yehuda, and then you would go ahead, rechayim, v'tayim. Everything's geschmack. Okay. Says the Gemara, Iboilu, Migagaroi Tanan, are we learning that you just pick, or Migagaroi Tanan, or ripe? It says Migagar means to pick, or if you go as Migalgaloi, it has to be ripe. Tanan, we're gonna prove it means ripe, R-I-P-E. Tanan, Toshma, Tanya. Shemen Zayis Mizeisoi, right? Shemen Zayis Mizeisoi. So it says Shemen Zayis, the Shemen Zayis Mizeisoi. What does it mean Shemen Zayis Mizeisoi? It means it was Shemen when it was mizeisai. When it was still in the zayis, it was shemen, meaning it was ripe. Shemen zayis mizeisai, when it was in the state of zeisai, when it was in that state, right? Then it was a ripened state. Mikan amru zayis rishon megalgaloi. There's your proof. The zayis rishon they would delay till it got ripe. B'roish hazayis, v'koin soy lebeis habad, v'toichnei b'rechayim. Rechaim, this is not Rabbi Yehuda. We said kaitish. We said you didn't use a grinder, you used the mortar. But we said you used the mortar. Okay? So we'll see the Gemara is going to discuss that. For noisnim b'salim, they put him in the sal. V'shem yetzim menu zeh hoya harishain. That was the number one quality. Toyin b'koira v'shem yetzim menu zeh sheni. V'chazu parik. They would take off the beam. V'tachan, they would grind it. V'ta'an, and put the beam on again. Zahaya shlishi. Harish l'menorah, v'ashar l'menachos. The bottom line is, guys, you have a raya that it's melaglagoy. You should make it ripen, right? It has to be shemes mizeis and melaglagoy. Right? Don't pick it off the top of the tree, but make sure it's right from the top of the tree. V'zayah shlishi, and the third round, right? That it didn't get so. See the guys, as it seems to be. The farther it got down on the tree, the less chance it had to ripen. That's why you had to put the third in a vat itself with the heat lying on each other to ripen each other. That's why the third was different than the previous two. Right? That's the third different than the previous two. Okay, Lenny, we're Pei Vav. We'll be by the last Mishnah soon. We'll be by the next Mishnah pretty soon. V'zeh shlishi, they would put it in a vat. The Beis Habad at Sheyilka until it's spoiled. Umalo Reish Agag, they put it on a roof. Voice say come in tomorrow. They would heap it up like a date. Actually, Yezuv Meimav till the moil went ahead and ran away from it. The Koinzel Beis Habad, the Toichne Berechayim. Again, this price is being a little more elaborate than the Mishnah. The Noisnim Besalin, V'Shem Yetzimena Zehoya Harishain, and Bekoira. They would then Toyim Bekoira. They put a Koira V'Shem Yetzimenu Zehoya Hasheni. Parak, they would go and take it out. Because of a Toichin, they would grind it again. Zehoya Shlishi. V'toyin v'zahaya shlishi. Harishan is kosher for the menorah. V'ashar l'menachos. Okay. So now Rabbi Yehuda. So guys, you had a raya. We want to know: did they let it ripen or pick? They let it ripen. So Eleni, you're up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines from the bottom. Rabbi Yehuda Omer lahoya toichnoi berechayim. They didn't go ahead and grind it with a rechayim. Ela koichloi b'machteshes. They pounded it with a mortar. Good. In other words, he argued on three things. One, they didn't grind it initially; they pounded it initially. Two, they didn't put it in the sal itself; they put it on the sides of the sal. And three, they didn't use a beam; they used stones. So he argues in three things. Hagufa kasha then. Therefore, the Bryce itself, as I pointed out to you, kaitish. When it says kaitish, they use the mortar. Money is Rabbi Yehudahi, not a Rechayim. Toich sal, but it doesn't say svivais hasal. It says the sal. Asal Rabbanon. Guys, the Bryce that we just mentioned, in one hand it's like Rabbi Yehuda, in another hand it's not. It's like Rabbi Yehuda that they use a mortar. It's not like Rabbi Yehuda who said you need to put it in, filter it through the walls of the sal. It says you put it directly in the sal. Says the Gemara, you're right. Hi Tana, this Tana of the Baisa, Savala Kavase Bechada. He holds like Rabbi Yehuda regarding using a mortar rather than a grinder. As opposed to Rabbi Yehuda, who says you need to filter it down the sides of the sal. They says you could put it in the middle of the sal. Okay, so just to Chazriba, we're discussing the process of grinding the oil, manufacturing the oil for the menorah and the mizbeach, for the menachos. There were three times they picked. Again, zaysim are picked at different times. The first picking was from the top of the tree that was exposed to the sun. The second one was level to the house. It seemed to be in the roof that level to that. And the third was what was in the bottom of the tree, which was not exposed to the sun, which was required you to put it in a vat separately to go ahead and ripen each other. And each of these three pickings required three processes, which were all basically the same. The first process was going ahead, pounding it with a mortar and putting in a sal. Rabbi Yehuda said you put it in the sides of the sal. The second process was putting a beam on top of it, and or Rabbi Yehuda said an even on top of it. The third one was what? The third one was what? And the third process was what? Was they would grind it and put a beam on it, and that was it. Fartag kli. Now, fellas, nimsa you have, guys, nimsa you have in the first picking 1, 2, 3, in the second picking 1, 2, 3, and the third picking 1, 2, 3. Now, the ones we're going to now go ahead and say, what are they for? In other words, what's good for what? And we're going to see if there's an equivalent on different levels. Do any of them go ahead and mirror each other? Says the Mishnah, Harishain Sheba Rishain, Ein Lamala Himenu. Meaning, that first picking that came from the top of the tree, that you put in the grinder and the sal, and it came down, that's the best of the best. Rishain of Sheba Rishain, the first process of the first picking is the best of the best. Nothing to talk about. Hasheni Sheba Rishain, the Sheni Sheba Rishon, this is after you put the kaira, the beam with avanim on top of it. For Rishon Sheba Sheni, and number one from process number two, Shavim. They're both equal. They're both equal. Okay, the Gemara is going to ask, how do you say they're equal? Where one you can't use for one you could use for a menorah, and the other one you can't. The Gemara is going to answer, we're speaking about linya menachos. Again, so number one of two is equal to number two of one. Guys, it's going to sound a little, but it makes sense, right? Number two of process one is equal to number one of process two, of picking number two. Hashlishi Sheba Rishain, and number three of number one, the Hasheni Sheba Sheni, and number two of number two, Varishin B'Shlishi, and number one of number three, Shavim. They're all equal. Now, they're all equal quality. Linya Menachos, if you notice, if giving your druthers to pick for a shemen, number three of one, or two of two, or one of three, they're all equal. Hashlishi Sheba Sheni, number three of process number two, of picking number two. Shlishi, again, process number three of picking number two. Vasheni Sheba Shlishi, and process number two of picking number three, Shavim, they're equal. Hashlishi Sheba Shlishi, however, process number three of picking number three, Ein Lamata Imenu, there's nothing worse. That's the garbage of the, which would make the most sense, right? You're going from Rishon Sheba Rishon to Shlishi Sheba Shlishi. Says the Gemara, and says the Mishnah, Avkal Menachos Hayu Bidin Sheyitnu Shemen Zayazach. The Menachos, really, there should be a din that you would need Shemen Zayazach. In other words, you need mamish pure olive oil. Mam Menorah Sheinu Lachila Tuna Shemen. menorah, which is used for light, and you don't, it's not considered achila, zayis, shemen zayis zach. Menachos shein la achila, guys, menachos, which are going to the mizbeach. Remember we spoke about pigel. You need for pigel, you need machshava achila. Either achilas adam or achilas hamizbeach. So madach for just pure light, you need the best of the best. Certainly for what? For the mizbeach menachos, which you ate, you would need the best of the best. Ein idin sheyitnu shemen zayis. Hamalaymar, it says zach katis lama'ar. It says zach katis lama'ar. The ein zach katis lemenachos. Katis means the first process crushed by the mortar. Lama'ar for the purpose of lighting the menorah. Vein zach katis lemenachos. But zach was not what? Crushed for the menachos. Amid base. Freddy Gemara, you said, guys, number 2 of 1 is equal to number 1 of 2. You said that the second process in the first picking is equal to the first process of the second picking. It says, how could you say they're equal? After all, number 2 of number 1 can't be used for a mincha, for the menorah, but number 1 of the second picking could. Again, number 1 could always be used for what? For the mincha, for menorah. If you're telling me number 2 in process 1 could be used, but it's not true, because it's not 1. How could you equate it with 1 of picking number 2, which could be used for the menorah? On that, the Gemara answers, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, my shavim, when it says shavim lemenachos. It means it's equal to menachos. In other words, you always want to do the best. So if I have a choice between the second process in number 1 and the first process in number 2, they're equal. Either one you use is okay. But if you would be the process number 3 in number 1, that would not be equal to 2 is better. Number 1 and 2 is better than 3 and 1. Okay. Avkal menachos hayibedin, that you should use shemen zayis, right? Zach Tan Rabbanan. Zach ein zach elenaki. When it says zach, it means what? Naki, without any te'ina, just what went into the sal. Meaning, you pounded it with a mortar. It seems the pounding with the mortar opened up the grape, up the olive, and now whatever flowed, that's naki. That's naki. Once you have to put the beam on it, it's no longer naki. So zach, shemen zayis zach, we're touching the pasuk. Ein zach ela naki. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, kasis, right? Without a rechayim. Ein kasis ela kotosh. It's with a mortar and not a rechayim. Yachle zach kasis pasol menachos. I might think that what I don't quite know how mean is this. I might think it's pasol menachos. Why do you think it's pasol menachos? It's better than anything. Anyway, Talmud Loimar v'sarin soiles bolul b'shemin kasis. It says what kasis, you could use it. It came out Talmud Loimar lama'ar. It says shemin zayis zach kasis lama'ar. So if you're telling me that kasis is lav dafka lama'ar, but it can even be used for menachos, why are you telling me lama'ar? Elufnei hachisachain. The reason we said lama'ar and not stam is because of the people. We had rachmanis. We had this gemara before, right? We had this gemara before. You might remember. Why don't we compare? Why don't we bring the shtei lechem from? Why you can bring menachos? You can bring from soilis, but the shtei lechem upon him you bought from afilu chitim. So the Gemara said what? And the Gemara answered, but since menachos is not as common as the lechem upon him, the lechem upon him is bought every week. In addition, it comes, each one of them is 2 esroinim, a total of 24. The Torah was chas al Mamoni Shel Yisrael, and that's where you had it before. And the Torah was chas al Mamoni Shel Yisrael, that you didn't, you could bring it from chitin, and you don't have to pay from soilus. So we have saying the same thing over here. The Torah was chas, and by saying lama'or, we're limiting. Even though you could use the mincha from pure processed oil, the first batch, nonetheless, it says no. We had rachmanis because that's very expensive, and therefore, Rabbi Laza, my chisachen, Torah chas al Mamoni Shel Yisrael. The fact that you could use kasis, but you don't have to use kasis. You could even use lav dafka. You could use any oil, lav dafka, the first batch. says Savib Esbnei Yisrael v'yichol Elecha Shemen Zayizach. Rav Shmuel Bar Nachmeni Elecha v'loy li. For you, you need Shemen Zayizach. For me, not. Loy lo'er I need tzarich. I don't need what? I don't need your. I don't need your light, right? And there's a limit over here. If you look at Rashi, the bottom Rashi, guys, when it gets wide, about 7 lines down, Elech l'tzoincha ulaharis chibaska lefanai. You're using that pure oil to show your love for me, but I don't need it. V'loy li. Bishvili, shaloi la'oira need tzarech. I don't need your or. V'loy la'achila. Shemayisi tzarech hayisi mitzava litain shulchan samach l'menorah k'minig ha'olam. As we're going to see in a second. So I don't need your light, and therefore you don't have to. Therefore, you do it for yourself, for your love for me. Now, if you want to eat something, fellas, if you don't see your food, you don't enjoy it as much. It's a very funny thing. If you don't see your food, you don't enjoy it as much. It could taste great, but if you don't see it, I still remember many years ago I was sitting and I served a duck in a sukkah, and some kid broke a light in my sukkah, and you couldn't see anything anymore. And I just couldn't. I couldn't. Of course, it's not nobody on the screen, right? And I think he's even there. He's not even a kid anymore. Baruch, is he there? There he is. There's the guilty party. He ruined my duck one sukkahs. But who remembers these things? Anyway, so again, if the purpose of the light was for eating, the shulchan should have been right next to the menorah. The shulchan should be right next to the menorah, right? But it's not. So that's what the Gemara says. Shulchan b'tzafayin. The shulchan's on the northern side of the heichel. Menorah b'darim. The menorah is on the south side of the heichel. And so you see that what? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not need the light. I don't need neither. Not that I need it for what? For achila, I don't need it for what? For light. Because now, if you want light in your house, fellas, usually on the inside it's wider, so the light dissipates. But in the base of Mikdash, it was the opposite. It was wider on the outside and thinner on the inside to show that you don't need it. It says Vayas Shlomo says Vayas lebayis chaloini shekufim atumim Tana shekufim. We're going to go ahead and be goyris like the shita mekubetzes. Shekufim mibechutz. They were wide on the outside. Vatumim b'fnim, and they narrowed towards the inside. Now, when it gets to the inside, you have a slit, right? So look, boy, so lo need tzarich to show that what? That you don't need the light. Michutz leparoichas eidis boil moed. Now, where do you set up the menorah? Chutz leparoichas is eidis boil moed. Eidis hu l'chol b'yei olam. It's an eidis to the world. Shehashchina shoyra b'Yisrael. That the shchina shoyra b'Yisrael. Now, how is the menorah what? Edus v'im toimer lo'irani tzarech v'lei kol arbaim shana shalch Yisrael b'midbar le'cholchu elo lo'iroi. All the 40 years in the midbar we had the Anania Kavod, Anania Eish. Ella Edus hu l'chol b'yei olam shashchina shoyra b'Yisrael. My edusa Amar Rava or Amar Rav Zener Ma'aravi. That's the western side. Shenoisna b'shemen keneged chavirasa. That they put the same amount of oil in the western as the other ones. They would go ahead and they would start from there. They would be madlik, and they would end. In other words, it went out last. It's showing you that you don't need it for R. Now this is the Ner Ma'aravi. Now this is big machloikus, exactly what goes on over here. We're going to see machloikus later in the Gemara. How is the menorah situated, guys? Picture me, I'm north and south, right? No, picture me. This is west and this is east. Okay, west and east. That's because the kachik. My head is the kachik kadashim, lahavdil. Right? Yeah, it is. In other words, that's the west and that's the east. So if the menorah was going north south, so none of that is more maravi than the other because that's maravi. They're all equal. So then the Nemaravi was the middle one. That was the middle one, because all the wicks went towards it. If, however, it was situated east-west, then the Nemaravi was the second one. If you'd walk in, it's not the first one, that's east. It means the first one that's west after it's the number two. Number one is the easternmost. Number one, two is the one that goes to the west. Machlokes is born Chav Beis and Shabbos. That's the machlokes between the two. Okay, I wish everyone a good yontif.